Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We hope that you're staying nice and cool. We know that it's hot in some areas of the state, but extremely hot in more areas than others. So you are here for today's presentation. OSHPD, the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development, is presenting temporary structures and uses. We are here going to go over some of that information. We're going to know the difference between temporary work, emergency work, and COVID-related work, whose authority, interim equipment, termination of temporary work approval, and much more. If you haven't done so already, feel free to download the PDF handouts that are provided for you in the GoTo panel under the handout section. We provided the presentation that we're sharing with you today, and we also provided the CAN, or Code Application Notice 2-108, titled Temporary Structures and Uses. We are here for about an hour and a half presentation with a half an hour of question and answer at the end of the presentation. You will all be muted during the presentation, so if you have a question during the presentation, go ahead, feel free to type it into the GoTo text box or the GoTo question box in your GoTo software toolbox there, and we'll be able to answer it at the end of the presentation. If you want to participate in an open dialogue, open discussion at the end of the presentation, feel free to raise your hand at the end of the presentation. We'll be able to unmute you, and you can unmute yourself, and we'll be able to hear you, hear your question that you have. Also want to remind you that if you are going to go ahead and ask a question, please keep your questions generic and keep it specific to this presentation. If you have a specific question that it's outside of the presentation or related to a specific project or a specific situation, feel free to email us at regsunit@oshpod.ca.gov. That's regsunit@oshpd.ca.gov. If you experience transmission difficulties, feel free to log back in using the same login information that the GoTo software sent you, and we will do the same if we have transmission difficulties on our end as well. So for today, as a presenter, we have Mr. Richard Tannehill. He is the supervisor for the Building Standards Unit, and we're also going to have the Regs Unit in the background answering questions in the typed in questions. So Richard, if you're there, the presentation is all yours.
All right, thank you, Caesar. Hello, everyone. Today, we will be talking about CAN 2-108, Temporary Structures and Uses. If you are familiar, we released this back in February with some major revisions. If you notice what's on the screen now, we also re-released it just a couple days ago. It's actually posted yesterday with an updated version based on some industry comment we received. Make sure you have the most recent ones. It's dated with a revision date of 6/23/21. That is the most recent version of this. So with that, we'll jump into this. Turn my pointer on. And first thing I want to talk about, just knowing the difference between temporary work, emergency work, and the COVID work. You get a lot of questions on this, especially with COVID wrapping up or a lot of the services being removed now. Temporary work is what this CAN is about. It's basically work that is being put in for use if you're replacing a piece of equipment or doing maintenance or repairs. It's going to be there for a short period of time, typically up to 180 days, and it's going to be removed when that equipment's repaired or replaced. Under temporary work, we're also using the term interim work, and that's basically work that is there for the duration of construction or as needed for construction. Emergency work is going to be if there is an emergency, be it a disaster of some sort or a localized occurrence at your facility or at a facility, and you need emergency work. We'll talk about this at the very end of the presentation, but basically you want to contact your RCO and let them know what's going on to get authorization for work. Emergency work allows you to go ahead and make corrections to get things up and running, and then submit the permit paperwork afterwards. And again, we'll discuss that a little bit more later. Work for COVID does not fall under this can at all. Work for COVID was done under emergency declaration by the governor, and a lot was allowed to be done that may or may not have been code compliant, and it is required to be removed and put back to its normal state. I believe it's by July 15th is the deadline for that to be back to normal. If you do have questions for that, go ahead and contact your region representatives, and they will help walk you through that process. But just want to make it clear that this can really does not address any work that was done specifically for the COVID pandemic. So let's talk about authority. The temporary structures, unfortunately, this is a very a text-oriented presentation, not a lot of pictures here, but really we're just trying to get to the point of what's required per the CAN. So there will be a little bit of reading. I'm trying to highlight anything important with underlines, and so we'll go ahead and go through this, and hopefully it'll be meaningful and not too boring. Temporary structures and uses. The building official is authorized to issue a permit, keyword here being permit, for temporary structures and temporary uses. Such permits shall be limited to the time of service, but shall not be permitted for more than 180 days. That being said, the building official is also authorized to grant extensions for demonstrated cause. So you'll remember there's the previous CAN talked about a 7-day, 30-day, and 180-day temporary uses. That is all kind of being massaged now. The 180 day is actually in the code. It can be extended for cause. Okay, conformance, temporary structures and uses shall comply with the requirements of section 3103 of the building code, and this is section 3103. I'm just going to go over this really quick. The purple text means it's reference only. Basically, any tents, umbrellas, structures, or other membrane structures erected for a period of 180 days should comply with fire code. It'll conform for the uses for structural strength, fire, means of egress, accessibility, light, ventilation, and sanitary requirements of this code. A permit is required. Just because something's temporary doesn't mean it can be done without a permit. And we'll talk about the options for that later as well. Construction documents, a permit application, you'll see that word again. Construction documents shall be submitted for each installation of a temporary structure. This will also apply for equipment, but it can be done as a joint permit for multiple pieces. Construction documents shall include site plan indicating location of temporary structure and information delineating the means of egress and the occupancy load. This section is primarily for structures, like you're putting a tent on there. So we do need to review it. A permit is required. We're looking at location and we're looking at egress are the primary things that we're looking at, as well as utilities connected to power if they're coming from the hospital. So for temporary power, since I mentioned power, the building official is authorized to give permission to temporary supply and use power in part of an electric installation before such installation has been fully completed and the final certificate of completion has been issued. Okay. So there may be different reasons you want to add power. Primarily, we're looking at servicing during construction or if something's being removed. So that can be done. Termination of that approval or any approval for temporary use is authorized. The building official is authorized to terminate that permit if the use is there for longer than the duration requested. If it's no longer needed or not being used, it can be asked to be terminated. Or if it's being used something for other than it was approved for. So if it was approved for a certain part of the building to do a certain thing and it's found out that it is no longer needed for that, but it's been transferred over to another use, then it is no longer in compliance and can be terminated. Interim equipment, this is being, the language you're seeing is what's currently in the code, and it actually is going to be revised in the future. The interim equipment means temporary equipment that will be in use for the duration of the construction project that it is related to. So the 180 days is not there for interim equipment, is for the duration of construction. Temporary occupancy, building officials authorized to issue a temporary certificate of occupancy before completion of the entire work covered by the permit, provided that such portions shall be occupied safely. So a lot of these are considered partial occupancies. You'll hear different terminology for that. If you finish a portion of a building and you want to get people in there and using that space, it can be considered a temporary occupancy or a partial occupancy, or a temporary use of a space while construction is going on elsewhere. But again, it would have to be reviewed and approved and shown that it is in safe condition. Temporary connection is the building official shall have the authority to authorize temporary connection of a building system to the utility, source of energy, fuel, or power. When we're getting into fuel, power, and energy, there are a lot more restrictions on that, and we'll go into those as well. Equipment for use greater than 30 days, but less than or equal to 180 days. And where this section requires supports and attachments, the following shall apply. This is kind of the basis. This is actually in section 1617A of the building code. But basically it states that seismic design for the supports and attachments for temporary equipment shall meet the requirements of chapter 13, except we're allowing a 50% reduction in the F sub P calculations. So half the requirement is only required. It is also acceptable to use ballast for the seismic bracing supports and attachments to limit the design criteria to overturning unless directly or indirectly supported by the building structure. You'll see this in our pharmacy guide. I believe I have a picture of it in the next slide, but we have a diagram showing how you can anchor say equipment on a trailer using K-rails or some type of ballast. The wind speed designs may also be reduced as described in ASCE 37-14 or otherwise approved by OSHPD. And also temporary piping, conductors, and ductwork shall be supported. Seismic design for the supports and attachments of temporary piping, conductors, and ductwork is not required, but a support system is. So if you have ducts or say temporary piping or ducts hanging from the structure above, they need to be supported. That's all it's saying. That means some means of support, but there's no seismic bracing required. Here's the picture of the trailer. I stole this from the pharmacy guide. There's also one in our temp oxygen guide as well that shows a similar type condition where we're just using a ballast to secure temporary equipment on site. When we get to interim equipment, this is actually a change from previous. The interim equipment for uses greater than 30 days, but less than the duration of construction does require supports and attachments. But again, for seismic design, the calculation is reduced by 50% for F sub P. Okay, it is also acceptable to use ballast for seismic and wind bracing and supports for interim equipment, as well as the wind design speeds may be reduced as well. Basically, the temporary equipment requirement that's shown here as well as here are going to align. Again, this is going to be new text. It's not in the current code. It's in the CAN, and it will be aligned with Pen 68 also for equipment anchorage. But this is new text to align it with the same as temporary equipment. Okay, and the same thing with the piping, conductors, and ductwork shall be supported. Okay, for electrical scopes, like I said, there's a lot more restrictions on electrical and fuels and gases. So what's important here, we're looking at the time restrictions. Temporary electrical is provided all the time, but for power and lighting installations shall be permitted during the period of construction, remodel, maintenance, repair, or demolition of a building, structures, equipment, or similar activities. It does require a permit, and we'll go over some of the code requirements that would be required if that is done. For mechanical connections to the service and the utilities, basically you shall not make any connections to energy or fuel to a mechanical system equipment without a permit. Okay, so unless there's a permit provided, you can't do this. The authority having jurisdiction shall be permitted to authorize temp connection of mechanical system equipment to the source of energy or fuel for the purpose of testing the equipment. So you can get a temporary connection up just so you can test it to see if it's working prior to putting it into use. When we're talking gases, temporary use of gas, a permit shall be required for the use for a period not to exceed that designated on the permit or by the authority having jurisdiction. Okay, provided that such gas piping system otherwise in accordance with requirements of this code regarding material, size, and safety. So there's no leniency as well for material, size, and safety when it comes to use of gas. And the same thing when with the med gases, it still requires inspection and testing be performed on all components or portions thereof. Any new gas pipes being added, renovated, or temporarily used. Okay. Temporary wiring for electrical power and lighting installations is allowed for a period not to exceed 90 days. There is an exception to that says temporary wiring for electrical power and lighting station is allowed during periods of construction, remodeling, repair, demolition of buildings, structures, equipment, or similar activities. Okay. Then we jump into maintenance of the egress system. You have to maintain egress at all times. Okay. Means of egress and required accessible means of egress shall be maintained at all times during construction, demolition, remodel, or alterations and additions to any building. Okay, the only exception to this, the existing means of egress need not be maintained where approved. Temporary means of egress systems and facilities are provided. So that means you can reroute the existing egress if it's approved, and you do not have to maintain the previous egress. So what's this all mean? This is basically, just want to mention, all of this information is in the CAN. We're basically going through it almost paragraph by paragraph. And this is where we get into the interpretation of the code. What I just recited was all the code requirements. So the California Building Standards Code provides building standards that authorize us, our building officials, to issue a permit for the provisions of temporary occupancies, uses, structures, systems, utilities, and equipment for limited time periods during construction or for other purposes. Okay, the temporary structures and equipment are those that are put in use for 180 days for emergency repairs or replacement. Again, we always have these exceptions for the 180 days. Interim structures and equipment are those used for the duration of construction project and are removed when the project is completed. The term temporary for this CAN will be used for the remainder of the CAN, and it will mean either a temporary or interim use unless otherwise noted. There's a lot of confusion between the two, but they really meet the same requirements when we're looking at the CAN. Okay. OSHPD may issue a permit as necessary for the use of temporary occupancies, uses, structures, systems, utilities, and equipment during project construction, remodel, repair, demolition of buildings under its jurisdiction for temporary conditions or for other causes such as surge tents during the flu season. Applications for the temporary use are reviewed by OSHPD and permits will be issued on a case-by-case basis. So if you're putting any temporary equipment or structures on site, it will need a permit. Okay, permits for the temporary use. Okay, this is where it gets into the differences. If you've done temporary work in the past, it may have required a separate permit. Permits for the use for temporary use may be included in the permit for permanent construction work. So if you have a project, you can include that work, the temporary work, in the primary permit. Okay, so it does not have to be a separate permit. It does need to state how long you expect the duration of use to be, because you may not need it for the entire duration of construction. You may need it for the first 6 months or something. So that duration should be identified, but it can be part of the primary permit. And it may be separate from, in addition to the primary permit, such as a separate permit specifically for that work. You may not have known it was going to, what exactly was going to be needed to provide temporary service during construction. So you've waited. Later on, it can be added a separate permit. It has to be opened and closed just as you would any other project. Okay. It will be associated with the project it's serving, and that project it's serving will not be able to be closed until that other permit is also closed. And it also may be added through an amended construction document or ACD through the primary permit. So again, you don't have to submit a separate permit. It can be an ACD and it can be part of the primary permit. Okay, what's important here is that we want to know what the period that's being needed. Is it needed for the entire construction or a portion of construction? So identify that on your documents. The temporary construction to satisfy the requirements in this can, as well as the remodel can 2-102.6. Okay, all code requirements for permanent equipment must be met as specifically noted in the examples below. I'm going to go through a list of items here that there are no exceptions for not meeting the code requirements for different types of equipment. And we'll start with temporary air handlers must meet the code requirements for filter efficiency and capacity. You must be able to maintain proper air balance and airflows. Outdoor intakes must still be located the required distance from the exhaust outlets, plumbing vents, etc., as required by the mechanical code. Temporary generator or temporary automatic transfer switch for emergency power supply must be sized to provide adequate capacity to meet the demand of operation for all functions and equipment to be served by each branch. Okay, that must meet all the requirements for if those were permanent installations. A temporary power, when I say all requirements, all the anchorage may have some exceptions, but the capacity must be there. Temporary power installation shall meet the requirements of Article 590 in the electrical code. And the temporary use of fuel gas may be issued per the CMC. Again, when you get the gas as an energy, there's very few requirements. Really with the electrical, you may not be running the wires and conduit, but everything else must be safe. And the temporary use of gas is under the condition that the piping system conforms to the requirements of the code regarding material, sizing, and safety. Okay, applications for temporary use. If you're doing an application for, like I said, there's different ways you can do it. It can be part of a construction project. It can be an ACD to that project, or it can be a separate permit to accommodate construction, but it also can be for a temporary use. If you're going to do maintenance on a facility and you need to bring in a temporary generator while your existing generator is either repaired or replaced, that is also temporary use for the equipment. Okay, with the exception of emergencies, the application for use of temporary systems, utilities, and or equipment shall be made to the office in advance of the anticipated use, allowing adequate time for review. Don't submit it and expect it in a week. We need to review it. We need to look at location. We need to make sure that everything complies. That needs to. That application shall include plans clearly delineating the location of the temporary equipment, routing and sizing of utility lines to power and or fuel equipment, and identification of the points of connection, routing and sizing of conduit, cabling, piping, and or ducting between temporary equipment and the existing distribution system, locations, sizes, and construction of any barriers, fencing, or other protective measures for the equipment and or piping, conductors, and ductwork showing adequate clearances when appropriate, and details of any temporary anchorage and bracing when required. Application shall also include certification from a structural engineer and supporting calculations when required. They're not always going to be required for temporary equipment. Application shall also include a TIO, test inspection and observation program, indicating related structural, mechanical, plumbing, and testing loads balancing for inspections and observations that are still required. And lastly, I think, duration of the use of temporary systems shall be noted on the plans. How long do you expect it to be there? Extensions can be requested and granted if it, for some reason, it needs to be extended beyond what was requested originally. Okay, let's get into temporary occupancies and uses. These must be shown on the plans for a related project or in a report issued by OSHPD if need be. If there's no related project, plans must be submitted for review and approval that clearly show that the specific area for temporary occupancy or use. And this is when you'll get into like a flu season and you want to put in a temporary flu clinic or an area to house people. It still needs to be looked at and approved by OSHPD. So we're looking at the specific area of the temporary occupancy or use, the purpose for the temporary occupancy or use, the time duration, and any required construction if there are going to be any modifications made. Okay, this must be part of a building permit prior to any temporary occupancy or use. Even if there's no construction, it must be approved. Temporary tents or structures shall comply with 3103, which we looked at the beginning. In addition to CDPH, there's 3 other entities that are required to approve temporary tents. You've seen a lot of them, surge tents brought in for COVID. Some of them didn't hold up very well, so they looked at more permanent type solutions. But the different agencies are looking at it. Besides CDPH, State Fire Marshal provides the rules for prevention of fire in connection with tents, awnings, and fabric enclosures. Local fire departments typically look for the configuration of the tents and access to them in case they need access. And then OSHPD has to verify that the hospital building is protected from adjacent hazards and exposures if you're placing a tent or a structure near the existing hospital or on the site. OSHPD will need to review the drawings, including a site plan showing the size and location of a temporary tent or structure and the utility hookups that originate in or pass through the hospital buildings, if applicable. The easiest way to do these temporary facilities is not to use hospital power, but sometimes you don't have a choice. So if you're using hospital power, you'd have to show that the hospital can still support the demands of the temporary structure, the uses going into it. When located adjacent to a hospital building, fire resistance and opening protection requirements for the exterior walls of the hospital building shall be determined by the local fire department based on the distance between the tent and the temporary structure of the building and in accordance with 704 of the building code and tables 601 and 602. Projections between the hospital building and the tent or temporary structure shall comply with the building code and are not limited when they are protected with automatic fire sprinklers. OSHPAG will also review utility connections for tents and temporary structures that originate in, pass through, or pass under the buildings regulated by OSHPAG. Again, if you can do standalone power or bring it in from somewhere else, it's going to be a lot easier, but you do always have the option to use hospital power. OSHPAG will not review the temporary structures for conformance with the building code, including seismic anchorage of the tent or temporary structure. But we will look at the related required side yards and to make sure that the proper clearances are required. Okay, but we're not going to be looking at the anchorage. We're just looking at it's being placed in a safe location and that you're not blocking access or egress from the hospital or access for fire department. And as well as we've seen some of the COVID tents were placed on the loading dock where they could no longer get garbage in and out of the facility. So those are things that we need to look at. Okay, interim structures are structures that are designed or put in place for the duration of construction. Examples of these would be temporary exit stairs. If you're replacing an exit stair or demoing a building, you have to provide temporary exit stairs that are only going to be there for the duration of construction. So structures erected to support healthcare functions, such as the exit stairs, or support structures for utilities and equipment that are required during construction can be designed to the lower seismic force, up to 50%. Interim structures are permitted to use the exception in 1617A. And interim structures also shall be removed at the end of the project for which they were erected, or you will not be granted final certificate of occupancy for that primary project. We do have cases where temporary systems are still in place after a project is long completed. So you will not get occupancy of the structure until those temporary items are removed. All other requirements for the equipment, systems, and utilities contained within or supported by the interim structure shall be designed using the following section. And this is the table that they're referring to here. So this is going to be the list of items for interim or temporary use. This is the table from the old one. You'll see here we have the 7-day, 30-day, and 180-day. That is no longer. What we have now is a new table. This basically identifies the item, the temporary use, and the requirements on the right. Okay, so this is the one you want to make sure you're using. So we'll go through each of these items. Temporary use of equipment may be mobile, truck mounted, or set on the ground or the roof. Okay, for seismic design and wind design, as we mentioned before, there are some reductions in requirements here, but for seismic design supports, attachments and special seismic certification are not required for installations less than 30 days. For uses 30 days or greater, but less than or equal to the duration of the project, seismic design for supports and attachments for temporary equipment shall meet the requirements in Chapter 13, however, may have an F sub P reduced by 50%. Okay. Again, we looked at this earlier. It's acceptable to use ballast for the seismic bracing and supports, and to limit the design criteria for overturning. Okay. The anticipated duration must be specified. Okay. Again, wind design loads and wind design speeds may be reduced per ASCE 37-14, and the special seismic certification of temporary equipment is not required. Okay. We're looking at prior to placing any temporary equipment on the roof, floor, or other structure, the adequacy of that structure to support the additional weight you must be confirmed and substantiated by an engineer, structural engineer. Okay, clearance and access around equipment shall comply with code, including internal access to the equipment when required, and a provision of a roof guard rail if it's within 10 feet of a roof edge. So the clearances for that equipment must still be maintained. Where applicable, automatic shutoff of the air handling unit for smoke control shall be provided with connection to the fire alarm system if temporary uses for longer than 30 days. Outdoor air intake for temporary air handling units must maintain required clearances from the exhaust. We mentioned this earlier. You still need I believe it's 25 feet. And temporary chillers located indoors shall comply with all the requirements of the Mechanical Code, Chapter 11. Okay, if located outdoors, pressure relief shall be located a minimum of 10 feet from the windows or outside air intake locations. Flexible ductwork is permitted between the temporary unit and the hard system. Note that there is no length restriction for flexible ductwork for temporary connections. Same with flexible piping rated for the pressure and media is permitted between temporary unit and the rigid piping system. Seismic bracing, we talked about earlier as well, for temporary piping connectors and ductwork shall be secured and supported. This does not mean seismically restrained. Okay, it just needs to be supported so it's not damaged, or it has some sort of support if there is something that does happen. Okay, seismic design for the supports and attachments is not required. The flex connectors shall be used where connecting from an anchored to an unanchored piece of equipment. Protective barriers shall be provided for pipes, ducts, and conductors associated with temporary equipment to protect them from physical damage. This is if they're laying on the ground or on a wall or something. And temporary electrical equipment and cables shall be protected from physical damage and guarded with suitable fencing and barriers. Again, we're looking at safety here, so no one gets electrocuted or equipment doesn't get damaged. For emergency generators, there's a longer section here, so I'm not going to go through it all. The emergency generators must have 24-hour fuel supply, 6 for a sniff, and have the integral fuel tanks, okay, or mobile fuel trucks or other approved means shall be provided. The installation acceptance test shall be performed on temporary emergency generator, except per the NFPA, but the difference is that the time duration, the test duration may be reduced to 30 minutes. Flexible power cables must conform to the electrical code. And essential electrical power temporary mechanical units shall be on essential electrical power equipment system per the mechanical code. And temporary equipment shall be located to minimize noise, steam, odors, hazards, and unsightliness in patient care areas and bedrooms as much as possible. Okay, equipment must be guarded against damage and located out of the path of normal path of vehicles. So we don't want them near where they're going to get potentially hit, and don't want them in the patient, outside the patient windows. I mentioned at the beginning that we'd be talking about emergency work. Just want to go over this real quick. I believe this is our last slide. Emergency work, like I said, is typically the result of equipment failure, natural disaster, or other occurrence. Okay, and you're going to need immediate repairs. We do request you contact the RCO or the compliance officer, let them know what's going on, get authorization to get services back restored as quickly as possible. Okay, if the building systems or components or the equipment are repaired or replaced under emergency conditions, the work must be approved and permitted as required through the administrative code in Chapter 7, Article 20. Temporary equipment and systems may be required to protect occupant safety and maintenance services during repairs. Equipment installed under the emergency authorization must have seismic design compliance with the table above, all the items that we just looked at above. It must meet those minimum requirements. And with the duration measured from the date of the time the equipment is put in place. Construction documents for emergency work that is to be in place longer than 30 days must be submitted to the office within 21 days of the temporary work authorization. A lot of questions came up on this one, that what happens if it's under 30 days? If you're getting emergency work to replace something that's less than 30 days, by the time you get the permit approved, it's basically going to be already removed from service, and the repair could have already taken place. So it's only required if it's there for more than 30 days. Projects submitted shall identify the temporary systems that are going to be in place and identify that they will remain operational until the new systems are in place and operational. So we don't want anything being removed from service prior to everything else being up and running and tested and fully compliant. So I was going to say something else on emergency work. I think that's it. The duration shall be identified. A lot of questions. This is the emergency work. Like I said, we want to make sure the facilities are up and running as soon as possible for obvious reasons, patient safety, and just to get the facilities working. Sometimes you may be required to submit the project for the replacement and in a compliant condition. And so some of the work that's put in, if it's not compliant when it is put in under the emergency authorization, it may need to be corrected afterwards. But the project to do the work, the repairs, this is kind of talking about if you're putting a temporary piece of equipment in, like I said, for less than 30 days, say emergency generator, you have to do emergency repairs on the existing generator. That's what that's referring to. But if the repair is going to be permanent, a permit is still required to be submitted to show compliance with the code for that piece of equipment. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, I'll open it up to questions, and I appreciate your time.
Great, thank you, Richard. If you do have questions that are specific to a specific project or something that wasn't mentioned in this presentation, go ahead and email us at regsunit@oshpod.ca.gov. It's that email address you see on your screen there, and we would be happy to entertain any conversations that you need clarification on offline. But before we do that, and we do want to remind you that you do have the option to ask your question now in an open dialogue format by raising your hand and clicking the little hand icon next to your name on the GoTo dashboard, and we would be happy to unmute you so you can unmute yourself and we can have an open dialogue. So with that being said, we do have a hand up from Mr. Robert. I know you've had your hand up for a while. So Robert, I'm going to unmute you if you'd like to unmute yourself, and like to hear from you. Robert, if you're still there, I'll give you a couple more seconds. If not, I'll go on to the next question. Again, feel free to raise your hand and participate in the open mic discussion. It's a great opportunity for you to go ahead and ask the presenter a question and be able to participate. Donald, I see you have your hand up. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. If you can unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, thank you. Quick clarification, just because it had a snafu on a project just earlier this spring, right after the new CAN was issued. Slide 25, temporary equipment, the table. Under seismic design, second paragraph says, if 24 hours or longer, temporary equipment to be anchored and braced in accordance with CBC section 1617A, et cetera. Slide 26 on the paragraph here, under seismic and wind design, bullet point number 2, it says for uses 30 days or greater, but less than or equal to the duration of the project, then it's to be designed, reduced, F sub P reduced by 50%. The first bullet point of that page on slide 26 is seismic design and supports, attachments, and special seismic certification are not required for installations less than 30 days. So to me, there's a little bit of a discrepancy between the table and the narrative.
Yeah, you're correct. We actually did this presentation several times, and I did not replace the table on slide 26. But if you look at slide 27, it'll have the correct language. The table was not meant, sorry, the table wasn't meant to be used as a reference, but you're correct.
Okay.
It was, yeah, the
So
slide didn't get updated. So what we're showing on slide 27 is the correct language. It's 30 days.
Okay, so less than 30 days, we need to simply, again, my specific example is a temporary generator brought in because I had to put a seismic flex in a conductor. So we bring in a temporary generator used for like 48 hours, 90, 72 hours, something like that. All we need to do is call it block the tires and guide the corners, or nothing at all.
Pretty much.
Okay. And
Yeah,
no
we did
aspect
go to 24 hours thinking that if it's 24 hours, somebody was going to be on site. But like I said, we got a lot of pushback from both industry and actually from our staff as well, saying that 30 days was what we've been using in the past, and it seemed to be working well. So we did go back to 30 days.
Okay. And so therefore, no ACD required, no, if it's less than 30 days, there's basically contractor can do what they need to do. We don't need to involve field staff.
All temporary equipment does need to be still permitted. Even
Okay.
if it's not anchored and brace it needs to be notified and
okay,
part of a project.
I much appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you for pointing out the discrepancy on 26. I'll correct that.
Great, thank you, Donald. Thank you for raising your hand. Those who have raised your hand, I do see a lot more names with their little hand icon next to it, so we'll get to you in just a sec, but I do want to get to a question that was typed into the GoTo dashboard under the question box. Richard, the question is for you, and the question reads, emergency generator testing per NFPA 110.7-13.4.1.4 requires up to 100% of the nameplate of generator, not necessarily wise for a used rental generator. Can the 100% nameplate value be reduced to the actual building emergency load, especially when the temporary generator, temporary generator
is rated much higher.
Yeah, sorry, I had to expand my screen there. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm getting the thumbs up from Bill Gow here that yes, that is allowed.
Great, thank you, Bill, for helping. And for those of you who don't know, Bill Gow is our resident technical expert for the electrical specialty here at OSHPD, Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development. So thank you, Bill, for that. I do have another hand raised here. Glenn, I see you have your hand raised. I'd like to unmute you. If you can unmute yourself, Glenn.
Actually, one after this call, Bill wanted to follow up.
Yeah, good morning, Richard. This is Glenn. I had a question on slides 10 and 11. I wasn't understanding the reference to chapter 13 relative to this subject.
It's for, oh, I saw that. I'm going to look into that.
Okay.
I didn't know that was your comment. Yeah, I got to double check that.
All right. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you for that. We do have another question that was typed in. The question is there any update on the remote monitoring of NFPA 110 for temporary generators in the CAN?
There's no update for that now.
All right, thank you for that. Next question reads, and I'm going off of the dashboard, the questions that were typed in. It reads, temporary generator testing and post-repair permanent generator testing within the past year is now required to be witnessed by the field FLSO, or Fire Life Safety Officer, which has...
I'm sorry, can you turn on Bill's mic? He's probably going to be better to answer a lot of these electrical questions.
Sure, let's see here. Let me find Bill here. Bill, where are you? Bill, if you can hear me, go ahead and,
He's on
Okay,
your tape.
you unmuted me. I'm on.
oh, perfect. Thank you, Bill. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm actually signed in as a viewer of this presentation. So as far as the CAN goes and the enunciation of the generator, you're still required to do a remote enunciation in addition to the enunciation at the generator. As far as the testing goes, we changed the testing requirement, Glenn, to do the building load test. It's 7.13.4.1.4. If that's the correct reference, that should be the building load test and not the nameplate test. So this is, you bring your temporary generator on site, you make the connections to the building, and you demonstrate that the connections are made correctly and run the generator for 30 minutes. So we're not requiring a load bank test on site any longer.
Great. Thanks. Thank you, Bill, for that. Good information. And yeah, thank you for unmuting him. I wasn't able to see him here on the list, but nonetheless, John, I see you have your hand up. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. And if you can unmute yourself, that'd be great. John?
Great. Yeah, thanks for answering the questions. I think, Bill, you answered my question about the temporary and then the remote enunciator. Maybe just a follow on. I do often get a discussion about hard wiring, or can it be, are there any other systems acceptable? But I think I hear you need to meet the NFPA 110 requirements for that.
Yeah, you got to meet the 110 requirement. Now there is in 110 and 99 the ability to do an offsite enunciation, and that would be an acceptable means as well.
Okay, and then yeah, that would be good. Either you have more specific information on that, or because I know sometimes
it's in I get you the code reference, but it's in
okay.
NFPA 110 and also in NFPA 99. And NFPA 99, the requirements are found for local and remote and network remote enunciation is 6.7.1.2.15.4.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so 6.7.1.2.15.4. You can send in the question and I can respond so you get the right code citation.
Okay. That'd be fantastic. Well, thank you for that. And then maybe this is my next follow-on question is to maybe Richard or yourself. It's great there's more, I guess, more latitude and scope in the field for the ACOs, but is there criteria? Because I think what I heard earlier on is, if approved by the building official, and it's great that they have that, but are there guidelines, or what would be the framework for if a client comes to me as an engineer and says, I think this is suitable, go get it approved by OSHPAR. Are there any guidelines in terms of what sets the acceptable to the building official?
I'm
Richard?
not sure I follow the question.
So if you go back,
give me an example.
so I think if earlier on I saw it said early on in the slide, like the duration of this, I think it said, gosh, I'm trying to think it, if as accepted by the building official.
Yes, I understand that. Typically, we're going to provide what's code required, and they're going to provide some means to do that.
Okay.
So there may be some exceptions that you're asking for some leniency on certain things, such as I don't want to anchor this, or we want to put a longer run in here. So that would need to be acceptable to the. It's going to be a case by case business
Okay.
decision.
Okay. All right, so thank you for that. So I understand it's got to meet code, but if there's something, a variance, you would agree that in the field with the building official.
Yeah, all the variances would be a case by case. For temporary, there may or may not be a little bit of leniency. There's certain things that must be still code compliant.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you.
Welcome.
Great, thank you for that. I do see more hands raised. Sean, Terry, and Warren, I see your hand raised. We're going to get to you in just a sec, but we're going to go and answer some of these questions that were typed into the GoTo dashboard. And Bill, this question might be for you. The question reads, temporary generator testing and post-repair permanent generator testing within the past year is now required to be witnessed by the field FLSO, which has hampered scheduling of this work. Is OSHPD-wide requirement, and are there other solutions such as witnessed by the IOR?
I think the way the code reads is it needs to be witnessed by OSHPD or the authority having jurisdiction and not the IOR.
Great, thank you for that. Now, I do see Sean, I do see your hand is raised. Would you like to unmute yourself so we can hear from you? Sean, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question about the temporary MRI trailer that is going to be used in our project for the duration of the construction. So is this going to be considered temporary equipment or structure?
No, the MRI trailers would be exempt from this, assuming that it's going to be 75% outpatient use.
It would be more geared for inpatients. So
If you're inpatient trailers, you're going to have a lot more requirements are going to be met, such as a connection to the hospital, or at least a way of getting them there. You may have to use ambulances, things like that. But trailers are typically handled. We have another can for trailer units. What we look at for trailers are the pads and the utility connections. The use of the type of trailer is actually through CDPH.
So we have a PIN 34 that talks about the mobile units for outpatient. Is that all the requirements in PIN 34 applicable for our situation?
The word there is outpatient. Outpatient facilities are allowed to see up to 25% inpatient. So there may be some additional requirements if it's higher than that.
Okay.
But I would say contact us offline to discuss that more specifically.
And this is going to be a totally separate project. Now we can't add this as an ACD to the primary permit.
I mean, there's always the possibility, it depends on the extent, but I'm thinking that it's going to be pretty complicated from what you're already telling me.
Yeah, utilities are already provided on site. So we were thinking about per PIN 34, the weather protection we have to provide. So that would be the kind of extent.
And they can do that through use of ambulances, things like that. Like I said, you probably want to talk to the region and go over this with them, especially if it's an existing project. Like I said, MRI trailers, imaging equipment trailers are treated completely separate from anchoring or temporary equipment.
Got it. Thank you, Richard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, Sean, for that. And that brings up a good point that we had mentioned at the beginning. If you have a specific project issue, feel free to send us an email at that email address you see on the screen there, or you feel free to use your resources and within OSHPD as well. Contact your regional compliance officer, and they can help you out with any specifics. So yeah, feel free to use your resources within OSHPD, and also that email address. Feel free to send us an email so we can provide you, as Bill pointed out earlier, a specific code section if it's something with an NFPA that tends to have those long code sections, right? So send us an email and we'd be happy to get to you and reply with the information you need. We do have another question here that was typed in. The question is for you, Richard, I believe. The question reads, when you say temporary equipment for the duration of construction, Does that include temporary trailers used for the facility departments displaced during construction? Example, SPD is using a trailer on site while the new tower is being built. Once the new tower is open and SPD moves in, the trailer is removed. Does this scenario apply, or is it just equipment for use of construction?
No, that would apply. Temporary, I believe we talked about temporary use and occupancies early on in this, and that would still apply. Especially if it's a basic service of the hospital, it's required to be in the hospital. You're going to need some allowance to not provide that in the hospital building, and probably an AMC to go along with that.
Great, thank you for that. We see another hand raised. Warren, if you're there, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. If you'd like to unmute yourself, we'd like to hear from you, Warren.
Hi, two questions. First one, basically anything over 30 days, whether it's interim or temporary, is treated the same. So since interim can be for the duration, for the full duration of a project, and a project can potentially last multiple years, is there any upper bound limit on how long you can go with something that is only designed for 50% of seismic or reduced wind loads, etc.?
No, there's no limit, but what if we're asking you to identify the duration of use? Because yeah, we know it can go years. What we're trying to avoid is if you have a 4-year project, that piece of equipment is there 6, 7, 8 years later, that needs to be removed from service. So yeah, there is a reduced requirement for the anchorage, and it is still considered temporary for the duration of construction, for the use during construction. So there's no time limit on that.
Okay.
But that does need to be approved on the thing. If you're requesting 10 years for something, you have to show cause why they would be in use for 10 years, because a lot of temporary uses are only for a portion of a project.
Okay, understood. And then the second one was it says under seismic and wind design that it's acceptable to use ballast for seismic bracing supports. The question that often comes up is what's allowed for a friction coefficient between for resisting sliding, and
that shouldn't be coming up.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
That shouldn't be coming up as an issue.
Okay.
Allowing the K-rails to be used. But I kind of laughed when I heard that, because I know that some of the clients have been asked that.
Mm-hmm.
So that should not be coming up as a question.
Okay, and when you but that doesn't just apply to a trailer with guy wires that are attached to K-rails. This could potentially apply to other items as well, right? If you prefer, theoretically you could put sandbags on the corners of a unit to keep it from sliding around if it's relatively light, and to resist overturning. But is something like that acceptable?
If you can show that it would meet the requirements, because there are
for 50% of FCP and right. Okay, and as long as we can justify.
We're not going to tell you how to do it, but if you can justify how it's done, it can withstand the loads, you're fine.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you for that. We have a next question here, and Jose, this question is your question that you typed in, but it might require some further explanation of what you're really trying to understand. So the question reads, Richard, fuel standards are the same for both in gas and wet state?
Yeah, I've read that. I don't understand the question.
Great.
So he knows more.
No, I need.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Bill. I don't understand the question either.
Great. So Jose, if you're there, I see you've called in, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you if you'd like to speak up and maybe clarify your question, please. Jose, are you there? Okay, not there. We can come back to that if we have time. But moving on to the next question here, we do have a question that's typed in, and the question reads: when you say temporary equipment for the duration of construction, oh, I believe we've already gone over that. Sorry. Question is: would the temp permit be added to the TIO?
The permit would not be added to the TIO, but the equipment should be on the TIO if there's any requirements for testing and inspection.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming that's what you're asking. Would this piece of equipment be on the TIO? If there is any requirements to be looked at, yes, it would be added to the TIO.
All right.
And
Next
if it's
question.
a permit, it would have its own TIO.
Perfect. Thank you, Richard, for that. Question regarding a temporary tent. Do you consider a tent for a temporary cafeteria or food preparation, or would you go to the tent and membrane section of the code?
I'm trying to find that question. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, the question reads, do you consider a tent for a temporary cafeteria or food preparation, or would you go to the tent and membrane section of the code?
Basically, to do food prep in a temporary facility, you're going to have approval by CDPH if it's not within the hospital building. Typically, we do not see tents for that. We see pretty stout modular type units brought in to replace that. We're actually adding some clarification in the future code to clarify that as well. That you can have an external portable, or I don't want to say portable, removable facility for temporary kitchens on the site, and that is fine. Currently, if you read the code, there's not a lot of allowance for that. But to answer your question, you're not going to see it in a tent or a very temporary structure because it is a required basic service of the hospital. You're going to have to go through a full process with that with CDPH to get any blessings on any external dietary provisions.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that, Richard. We do have one hand raised, Samuel. I do see your hand raised. Thank you for that. I want to encourage all of you who haven't had a chance to raise your hand and participate in the open mic discussion to raise your hand and really have ask your question, ask for further clarification. So Samuel, if you're there, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. If you can unmute yourself, we'd like to hear from you.
Thank you. I did type in my question as well in the chat. So basically, if we have some existing vacant space within our hospital that we would like to allow a contractor to use during a construction project, would this be something that we would apply for like a temporary project, or should it be just actually an ACD to allow the use of the space?
This is just for the contractor's offices during construction?
Correct, but it's actually within our hospital, so
Yeah,
for example, more shelf space, or
if it's within the construction space, you're probably fine.
outside of it, yeah.
If it's external to it, you probably just have to go through just let us know what's going on. Typically, when we do those type of projects, it's either in a vacant space and it's just a temporary use of that space. That's usually not a big deal. And we see it quite often.
Okay, so should I do like an ACD for that, or just like a separate project?
I would talk to the CO and see what they want for that. It's usually, I mean, we do it all the time.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you for that. Great question, by the way. This next question comes from Lisa. The question reads, what type of hospital services are allowed in a trailer? A refrigerated morgue, sterile compounding, CT scanner, what other services?
Oh gosh, that's a open question. Typically, you don't you want either a redundant service or a supplemental service in a trailer. If you're putting one of the basic services in a trailer, it's no longer in the hospital. As I mentioned with one of the earlier questions, that's more complex. There's more requirements for that because you're basically putting in OSHPD 1 service in a trailer or in a temporary facility. But there are, like I said, a lot of the imaging stuff are in trailers. Like I just mentioned before, the dietary can be in not so much a trailer, but a modular unit. I mean, there's one-off situations for procedure rooms. Again, the more you go with the outpatient services, the better off you're going to be. So I would need specifics, but there's a lot of uses for the trailers. But what you have to be careful of is moving basic services out of the hospital. Example, pharmacy or a lab, you're going to have more stricter requirements for that.
Great,
Not
thank
that
you,
it's not
Richard.
bad, but there's just going to be more process to go through, more approvals to go through.
Thank you, Richard. This next question comes from Jason, and it may be something that he needs to refer to the RCO for, but the question reads, we had an emergency permitted chiller installation at 50% seismic design. We are submitting a project for chiller replacement. Can the emergency permit be converted to an interim permit for the duration of the permitted chiller replacement project at 50% seismic design?
I'm just reviewing the question real quick. It took me a second to find it. I missed the first part of the question.
Sure. The first person reads, we had an emergency permitted chiller installation at 50% seismic design, and we're submitting a project for chiller replacement. Can the emergency permit be converted into an interim permit for the duration of the permitted chiller replacement project at 50% seismic design?
Again, I would talk to your field staff, but I don't see why not. If it was especially if it's going to be in use while you're replacing the original chiller, there should be no reason that can't remain longer as an interim. I'm assuming it currently has a time limit. So, but yeah, I would talk to the field staff. There should be no reason. Actually, reference this CAN because it's applicable now. It just, like I said, it was posted yesterday or this morning. The field staff has had training on this, and they should be familiar with the requirements. So I would talk to them. If not, contact me. But there should be no reason that you can't change it from a temporary to an interim. Really, you just want to make sure, we just want to make sure the facility is safe while it's being, the chiller is being replaced, the permanent chiller is being replaced. That's the goal here.
Great, and I'm going to go ahead and unmute Mr. Shane Gross. He is also part of OSHPD. Shane, I see you have your hand up if you'd like to add something to that.
Yeah, so the chiller converting from temporary to interim, the interim requires the full ASC 7 Chapter 13 requirements, so you wouldn't be able to still do the 50%.
It's 50% with the brand new CAN that was posted yesterday.
Oh, it changed it?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
we need to change PIN 68 now?
Yeah, the two big changes was from 24 hours to 30 days and allowing 50% for interim. So we are changing the code as well to reflect that.
I see, okay.
And PIN 68 will be updated as well to reflect that as well. Ali is working on that.
I see.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. So as those of you who are on the call, as you can see, we also have field staff that also join us for these webinars. So feel free to ask questions. And like I said, this is a great resource for you. So feel free to raise your hand, and we'd like to hear from you and talk to you and answer your questions. So if you don't like to do that or don't want to do that, go ahead and type your question into the dashboard under the question section of that GoTo dashboard. So with that being said, we do have another question, and Bill, this question might be for you. The question reads, what are the requirements for temporary wiring / building power being utilized for temporary equipment that is more than 30 days and less than 30 days.
The same.
Yeah, if you go to the power cables in the table, you'll find that there is no time duration for that. And that also is found in the electrical code section 590. It's just the duration of construction. You can use temporary cables. As far as attachment to the building utilities, electrical power, the temporary work that's shown on the plans need to indicate connected load. And if you can demonstrate your connected load via pin 38 and that there is sufficient power, that connection is the duration of construction.
There's no difference between the over and under 30, correct?
Not for electrical.
Correct.
Great, thank you for that. Good information, Bill, as always. We do have another question, and the question, this might be for you, Richard. The question reads, can a temp or interim request be submitted during an active project anytime?
Yes, it would be ACD at that point, or it can be, like I mentioned in the presentation, it can be an ACD or it can be a separate permit. That's your choice, or the facility's choice, how they want to approach that. Previously, it was required to be a separate permit. The old CAN stated that it was a separate permit, but we are allowing it to be an ACD to an existing project if it hasn't been done yet.
All right, thank you for that. The next question reads, does this CAN retroactively affect approved projects? And I'm assuming the question is referring to CAN 2-108.
This CAN would affect any project under the 2019 building code and future moving forward.
All right, thank you for that.
The requirements for, if you have an older project and you're putting something temporary in, we can still apply the requirements here. We're not going to say no. You're under 2013, so you can't do that, or 2016. We're just going to, these are the requirements for really moving forward. So.
Great, thank you, Richard. Do want to take this time to remind you, I know that we've mentioned it a couple of times. Raise your hand if you have a question. If you don't want to have a open dialogue, send us an email at that email address you see there. We are nearing the end of the questions that are typed in as well, and I don't see many or any other hands raised. So we do have 13 minutes left, and that we have for answering questions. So with that being said, here we are for the next, almost the last question here. Richard, the question is for you. It reads, are temporary permits for repair, for example, not part of a construction project, reviewed by field staff or office?
It can be either. I would typically, with the repair, start with the field staff. Again, it depends on the complexity of what's being done. With repairs, the field staff are most likely going to be more familiar with the facility and what's required to repair it, and they can give you a lot more guidance than probably the office staff can, but it can be either. There's a lot of variables that would determine that, but I would start with the field staff and have the conversation. Again, it depends on their schedule as well, their availability.
Yeah, and that's something that we want to reiterate, that the field staff is a great resource for you. If you haven't done so already, you can get their contact information, get familiar with their availability, and they are a great resource, whether it's your RCO, your DSC, FLSO, your ACO, or the CO. They are a great resource for you. And if not, send us an email. We can definitely help you that way as well. The last question that we have here, Richard, the question reads, or this may be for Bill, it reads, does flexible connection require for temporary and interim equipment between conduit and equipment?
I'm not sure what that question means, to be honest.
Well, if they're talking, Caesar, if they're talking about an electrical connection and they're actually using conduit, then it would be the same as any other permanent connection, and you would use some flex. Yeah.
Great. we do want to go ahead and Deep, we do have, did that answer your question? I did unmute you if you want to give you the opportunity to clarify, or if that answer is good enough for you.
While you're waiting for them to respond, Shane actually added a comment here that chapter, the 13 reference that we have for temporary occupancies, slides 10 and 11 on your deck is a reference to 13 of the ASC 7. So I will, again, I appreciate that, Shane. I'm going to double check that and make sure the slide's clearer in the future. So I think Glenn asked that question. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Shane, for that. And thank you all who have participated in providing, whether it's a question for further clarification and being able to give us the opportunity to answer that for you. Keep in mind that if you have a question, someone else might have the same question, but you know, either too shy or don't want to participate. So thank you for that. And we did hear back from Deep. That did answer the question. So thank you for that. I am going to go over the list of names to see if anyone else has their hand raised. I'd like to hear from you and give you the opportunity to ask a question or ask for further clarification. And it does seem like we've answered all of the questions that were typed into the go-to dashboard under the questions area. And if you haven't done so already, feel free to download the presentation and the CAN that was uploaded for your use under the go-to dashboard under the handout section. Feel free to download that and be able to use that for future reference. So with that being said, no further questions were typed into the go-to panel, and I don't see any more hands raised. I'd like to go ahead and let you know that we here at OSHPD would like to have you know that on August 24th, we will be putting on an OSHPD 3 clinic webinar in association with the California Primary Care Association, or CPA. If you'd like to go ahead and register for that, look for it on our website at oshpd.ca.gov. And if you haven't done so already, feel free to sign up for notifications from OSHPD for up and coming webinars, tips of the day, information that's relative to your projects. You'll receive those in an email fashion. All you have to do is go to our website, oshpd.ca.gov. On the upper right-hand corner, click subscribe, provide all of your information such as name, email address, and let us know what areas you'd like to know more about, whether it's building safety, financing, design and construction, etc. We would be happy to send those emails out to you. I do see Gary with your hand raised. Gary, is there something you'd like to add? I'll go ahead and unmute you before we give the closing comments. Gary?
Yeah, I did have a question about temporary air handlers. The CAN indicates that they need to maintain proper air balance and airflow. Does that include accounting for filter loading? And would the duration have any effect on that?
As far as I know, there's no exceptions to that. They would be stated here.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you for that. I do want to take the opportunity to thank all those who did raise your hand and did ask the question and did type in that question into the question section on the go-to dashboard. Do want to thank Shane and Bill for helping out, answer questions, and Richard for your very informative presentation, and Lori in the background helping answer questions in the typed portion of the go-to dashboard. So with that being said, we want to thank you for being here, and until next time, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for doing your part in providing access to safe, quality healthcare environments throughout the state of California. Until next time, stay safe and stay cool.